Okay, hi everyone. Kirsten asked if I could do a demo of some of our YARM work, and I thought it'd be useful to make a screencast so that you could play it back later and maybe ask for clarifications. There are bits where I might talk a little bit fast. I can add notes, things like that. So just to give you a little bit of a brief overview of where we are. We've had an internal project running at Knowledge Integration for since Christmas, really, and that project has a working title of YARM, Yet Another Resource Manager. We're not very good at naming things. There are some things we've done, some things we've not done yet. I thought I'd give you a brief update. So Yet Another Resource Manager. Our goals are to learn from what we've been doing in projects like KB Plus and GoKB and Folio as well, to try and come up or to play with ideas around electronic resource management and shared external knowledge bases, because a lot of the ERM systems around blur this line between the knowledge base and the ERM. And if we want GoKB to survive, GoKB exists in a world where perhaps there's a more clean divide between the knowledge base and the ERM system. So the question for YARM is, what would that look like? What would an ERM which had a clean separation between possibly many external knowledge bases and the resource management part, what would that look like? We've also been involved in a number of resource sharing systems, so more on the ILL side and document delivery. And I think we'd started to notice some strange parallels between the way that consortia are organized in those kinds of networks and in the sort of collective agreement sharing ERM space. And we were interested in a platform that let us look at how those networks are organized and the sorts of services that you need to support them. So YARM again is a platform project where we can ask those kinds of questions and try to figure out what the answers are, really. We're very interested in this being the basis of a shared service. So could we build a shared service around this? Can we cleanly bridge this local and remote divide? So what would an ERM look like if it didn't have its own knowledge base, if it used knowledge bases out there? And obviously, most of all, we're keen to understand how, when the Folio system or the Folio ecosystem evolves, we will be able to fit things like this ERM component into that world. So we're still very interested in some of the traditional ideas of distributed systems and perhaps microservices, but perhaps more modular microservice approaches, to use the Stanford Digital Library meaning of microservices rather than the newer, more trendy microservices ideas. So if we could isolate ERM functions in one area, how would that look and how would that integrate with other services? In terms of its status, the commercial side, so this is an exploratory project for us. I have a real sense that there's an appetite for something like this. It feels like there's a gap with the current ERM provision. Either the current ERM systems are very siloed into a particular consortial setting, which makes it difficult to apply them in other places, or they're not quite as service oriented as we would like, perhaps. So the question is there a space for something like this that's commercially developed and supported, but is fundamentally still open source? So that's what we're trying to understand with this piece of work. How could we make such a thing more sustainable? That's the question. Can we draw on experience from KB Plus and GoKB and Folio and other consortial projects and bring that into this new open source thing? Who can we collaborate with to find answers to those questions? And what sorts of new models, what new requirements are there in the ERM space? What fundamental needs have we sort of missed with the work we've done so far? Are there any bits of the model that we just, if only we'd known this 3 years ago, we might have done something different? How do we explore those things? The technical status of the project, we have a pretty sound working data model. I will just, so the project is at GitHub kint /yarm. Oh, don't want to go to the network. So there's the project. You can download it. You can play with it. I know you guys have devs who are into everything. I know you've been committing to GoKB, so that's brilliant. So GitHub kint yarm is where this project lives. We have a working data model. So it's using Hibernate, so it's database agnostic, but we're implementing it on top of Postgres for lots of reasons, mostly because, of course, Folio is heading towards a Postgres-centric view of the world. So that's what we're trying to, we're thinking, how are we going to integrate there? How might that look? And because Postgres is just a great piece of software to work with for this kind of thing. We have a live link with GoKB, so the bit of software I'm going to show you in a minute, on demand really, you can press a button and say go sync up with the latest changes from GoKB, or just on a nightly basis it'll go and get the latest package updates from GoKB, and it can do that with any GoKB type system. So if you support the GoKB OAI model, then you could actually gather package data details into this system. If you were to front another knowledge base like EBSCO EPKB with an OAI service, you could build a facade, for example, then you could suck that knowledge base down into this system. We've never written up the GoKB OAI interface as a kind of de facto standard, but that's kind of how we're treating it in this project. We're saying actually that's a pretty good way of shifting package data around that isn't KBART like CSV files. And we do have this need for deeply nested structured data at the package level. So the OAI is quite a nice way of doing that. In some respects, it would be nicer if it were JSON based, but the fact that it's XML based is fine. It's very easy to migrate between the two. In terms of our done work, we have very rudimentary agreements, signatories, licenses, and a link resolver export. I'll explain some of those terms. We need a glossary or a terminology thing. Things that we're working on at the moment. We've got very granular objects, so we have agreements and we have titles. We have what are called signatories. I already mentioned those. Those objects tend to have one or two properties at the moment, like name and date. As we start elaborating, I think we're going to need to add a lot more detail to, to the data model, but I don't expect we'll be adding major objects to the domain model. I'm sure we will be adding some, but I think the major work in the coming month or so is going to be to elaborate the properties of those objects more. We're adding a lot of structure around the idea of a directory. So the application has two areas. It has like a my area and then a public facing view. It'd be really nice if we could put some more structure around the directory thing. In consortial settings, that's quite important because it's nice to have a page for the consortia where you can see the members and you can navigate. And if people want to share contact details, you know, where you can access that kind of data. We're going to be doing a lot more work on the institutional functionality, so what I can do, and we're going to do some more work on the licenses. Licenses is probably the lightest bit of this at the moment, but I suspect it's going to be the bit that's going to see the most rapid work because it's not that complicated. Compared to the way that packages and subscriptions work, the licensed functionality is not terribly complicated. Yeah. What we've not done yet, there's no graphical design effort, so everything that I'm going to show you is vanilla Bootstrap that's been done by a developer. We've focused on the internals of the system, on the coarse parts of the data model, so there's no pretty design. This is not pretty stuff. We have a great designer in-house. You know, at some point we'll just pass this over and say, Mark, what do you make of this? One of the questions Kirsten asked me was where might we be able to contribute? Actually, the graphical design part might be a really interesting place to set, not just the graphical design, but the whole UX. The idea that subscriptions really need a widget number property, or an extensible list of properties that you can set on a subscription. There are lots of ideas, and I think our work to date has been getting these large pieces in place, but we're starting to get to the point where we might just open up a backlog and say, throw your ideas in here. We will pick the stuff off the backlog that we're going to do next, and let the community decide what our priorities should be. As I said in the commercial thing, we've got no funding for this at the moment, so it's an internally funded project. So we choose what we want to do next based on what seems like the most fun, I guess. But those priorities can be influenced. That's the nature of open source projects. A quick word on terminology. Again, this is an area where we could do with some help and some assistance. So we talk about tenants primarily because a user belongs to an institution normally, but a user could also belong to a consortia. So you could be an administrator in a consortial organization rather than a university or some other educational establishment. We use the term tenant to basically identify a very specific area of the website, which is like my organization. So my organization stuff. If we had a tenant called the University of Knowledge Integration, that would be a tenant where all the users who are members of that organization can gather and share. So tenant becomes a focal point for activity amongst colleagues, and that's what it is. Whenever we use the term tenant, we're really meaning university or consortia or some other legal entity that might take up a subscription or an agreement. Institutions, universities, can be members of consortia or groups more generally, and that's actually quite important for the way that we're modeling things. We've got a pretty expansive directory, as I think I alluded to earlier on, and this idea that organizations can be members of other organizations is important, and it's the way some of the sharing works, so we can talk about that. Agreements is a term that I'm going to use quite a lot. Again, reflecting on some projects like KB+. One of the areas of tension that we see is consortia often negotiate agreements on behalf of their members, and something that causes a great deal of unintended effort was member organizations can copy consortial agreed agreements. Sorry, that's terrible language. Consortial agreements, let's say that. And then whenever the consortium negotiates a change to that agreement, that change gets propagated to everybody who has taken that agreement. And originally, I think we felt that was the perfect model because institutions, universities, wanted to be able to accept or reject individual changes. But the feedback and the honest truth is it doesn't really work that way. The consortium negotiates on behalf of the consortium, and then everybody gets what the consortium negotiated for the most part. Actually, institutions accepting and rejecting individual changes is not really what institutions want to do. For consortial agreements, it turns out people are much happier to accept what's been said. Now, they might set flags that say they want to be told that something has changed, but generally speaking, if you're signing up to a consortial agreement, you're accepting of the whole package. And what's important is that you've signed a license, not that you've got a copy of the agreement. So we've modeled agreements slightly differently, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And particularly, we've got this thing of signed agreements. So an agreement can be held and can be negotiated by a consortium, but then signatories or institutions, to you and me, can then sign those agreements. So what we have is one agreement, but institutions can choose to sign it. So this means a consortium can negotiate an agreement, share it with the consortium, and then members of that consortium say, yeah, I want that, I'm going to sign that agreement, and I'm going to have my signed copy of that agreement, but it's not a separate thing to the agreement. It's it's just a signing of something that somebody else has negotiated. That's not to say that we're going to prevent institutions from having their own agreements. You can definitely still do that in this model. It's just that we've added the ability for a consortia to share an agreement, and when you're using that mode, you're doing something slightly different. You're saying, this is going to be negotiated centrally, and I'm going to get what you're given, and I'm not going to question that, but I am going to manage my use of that separately. I hope I've not confused you with that. This is a very small part of the data model, but I wanted to just talk about it. Agreement is, I hope you can see my mouse. Agreement is the fundamental unit in many ways. It's what we used to call a subscription, and the terminology change came from Coral. That's really what was the primary driver for this change in name, and because subscription is too overloaded already. Agreements can be shared with consortia. So if I create Ian's consortium, I might negotiate an agreement, and if you're in Ian's consortium, then you have the option of taking up that agreement. Tenants, that's institutions, can belong to a consortium. You can belong to many consortia, actually, no problem with that. Agreements are composed of agreement content or agreement items. Naming's tricky here, but the important thing is agreements consist of either packages or individual titles, and that's what all this shenanigans is about. You might recognize this part of the model is extremely close to GoKB, and in essence, GoKB is cached locally inside YARM using this data structure. So we have platforms, packages, titles, and this tip object in the middle. Actually, we call it something slightly different in YARM, but it's a tip by other names. What we're saying is that an agreement consists of a list of either packages or individual tips. The reason that that's important is in Folio, we have found repeatedly people saying, but I don't subscribe to a list of titles, I subscribe to the package. And it was felt in KB Plus, we force people to subscribe to a list of titles. There's no way for you to say, actually, I get all of Elsevier's Freedom Collection, and that's it. I'm not subscribing to a title list. I'm subscribing to the package. There's nothing stopping a consortium or an individual institution creating an agreement which is solely a list of titles. But what this data model does is allow you to say, no, my agreement consists of a package. And if you want to curate a package using GoKB, if that becomes your shared understanding of what the contents of a package is, then that works really well for you, because it means whenever the package changes, essentially the access you will get in your systems changes. So there's no need to accept or reject changes. All you're doing is you're subscribing to a package, you will get what GoKB or whoever your YARM provider, your knowledge base provider thinks should be in that package. There's no reason why you can't say the agreement that I've negotiated for you as a part of Ian's consortium consists of the Elsevier Freedom Collection and these additional 5 titles. So it can be one of these and then 5 of these as well. So agreements become quite flexible in a way that we've not seen in other ERM data models, I don't think. So you can mix and match your approaches, basically. What's important, though, is that an agreement is just an abstract statement of access to packages and titles. It doesn't mean anything until it's a signed agreement. So what we have is this idea of a signatory. And an agreement can be my agreement, or it could be an agreement from a consortia. Either way, it's my signing of that agreement which becomes important. And a signed agreement belongs to a tenant, which is an institution. So the University of Knowledge Integration sign their own agreement, or they sign a consortial agreement, and that will be accompanied by a license. So this signatory thing is what links an institution with a license and a particular block of content. The reason we've got a line going from agreement to license is it's anticipated that agreements might have template licenses attached to them. That's something that we see quite often. So if you're going to sign this agreement that's been negotiated by the KINT consortium, then here's the license you're ultimately going to have to copy and sign. So this is where you get the thing you're going to copy. This is the link of your actually signed copy. So this is where you might be able to say things about how you interpret the license. That's a small part of the data model, but it's probably the part of the data model that's most different to the way that ERM systems have worked, that we've worked on. I'm going to just quickly go through some of the screens before I show you them live. Login front page. Currently we're using OAuth, so you can either have a local account in a very traditional username password way, or you can sign on using OAuth like Google, for example. We've got a Shibboleth to OAuth bridge, which means we can support Shibboleth login through OAuth. Basically, there'll be another box on the screen here that says sign in using your IDP, your identity provider, and that would allow users of institutional authentication systems to authenticate using your Shibboleth infrastructure. So that's something we can do, but it's not something we're focusing on at the moment because we're into the detail of what goes on. Users are attached to institutions. And institutions could be consortia, of course, as well. So when a user first logs in, they land on the dashboard page for the institution. So you can see I'm a member of KINT University here. Currently, we're trying to figure out what belongs on the institutional dashboard. It's great that we don't have content that we feel needs to go on here, because it means that we can use it to do some kind of aggregation, alerting of important things, upcoming dates. You've got agreements that are expiring, all that kind of stuff. Currently, that's a blank canvas, and we're not quite sure what we're going to put on that yet. So that's nice, but that's where you land as a new user. The institutional titles menu, which is this menu here, is there's no easy equivalent to this in KB+, and it's largely inspired again by Coral. This is the list of all the titles which one way or another I've got access to. So you can see that on this screen I've found 396 titles available to the institution. So what that means is that across all my subscriptions, all my agreements, I've currently got access to that many titles. This is the screen which I think, at least to begin with, this is the workhorse screen. You'll see, I'll show you. There's the exports button up here. This is where you're going to say, create me the list that I'm going to feed into my link resolver to actually make my collections come alive. This is the interface through which you will deal with the set of resources that your institution can access. The other screen then, which I'm going to go through, but I wanted to talk about, is the agreement screen. This screen lists all the agreements you've got access to. It will list agreements you haven't signed. So through your membership of consortia, you will have access to a great many agreements. You're not going to choose to take them all. So the idea of this screen is, this is the screen which is closest to the KB Plus subscriptions screen, except that it shows quite a lot more than that. I think it's probably easier if I log on. Just let me. Okay, so I'm already logged on, and you can see I'm a member of an institution called Ian's Test Tenant. Not very exciting. As I said, my dashboard is empty currently. I'm also an administrator, so I see this admin menu. Um, quickly to run down these things, managing affiliations. Users might like to be able to say, no, I really am a member of staff at such and such university. This is the place you can approve or reject those, so that you can bootstrap the process for a new institution with their first administrative user who can then onboard more users. Upload organizations data is a way to bulk load a CSV. It's very similar to the way that I know you've already uploaded organization data to KB Plus, and hoping to use the same CSV file format for that. Force sync, and just to remind you, this is all vanilla bootstrap, so that's why it looks pretty poor, and you've got white on a white background, because I have no eye for design. So the drive has been the functionality. Force sync. Force sync is where we can say, actually, we think GoKB is updated. Can you please go and check now and pull down any package data? That's what that does. Manage global sources. Quickly click on that. You can see that currently there's only one global source, and that's GoKB. And we can look at the details for that. You can see this is actually a live link to GoKB's OAI server. That's what's going on there. Managing tenants, again here, I can create, so this is an administrative function. If I'm not going to bulk upload organizations, I might want to manually create them. I should be able to click on new here and say, I don't know, let's say KI consortium, save that. Okay, and if I go back to the list now, you can see I've got KI consortium. From there, I can manually add users if I want to, which is something you might want to do. The important thing, though, manage tenants, there we go. The URI part here, so Ian test, when a user logs in and goes to the home thing, they're going to /institution/ and then that URI. And one of the things we've been really keen to do is to try and do URI design, because we suspect people will want to integrate with this, and the way to do that is by having cool URIs that are actually semantically meaningful, and that's quite a driver for us. So we'd like people to be able to bookmark this thing and that be their institutional homepage and be where they come to. Yeah, so that's a manage users, so I can obviously manage my user accounts. That's the admin menu, and not terribly important. Home institution page. So these two options, these three options, change home institution. This won't normally be visible. However, if you happen to be a member of multiple institutions, then this is where you can switch, and you can say, actually, I want my focus to move from Ian test to super consortium view, and that's how you will switch context. Because sometimes people do have two roles. They work in a library and they work for a consortium, or maybe they work for two libraries. It's an edge case, which is why this only appears if you're a member of more than one organization. Obviously, I am. But these two options, titles and agreements. So, titles. This is the definitive list of all the resources that my institution currently has access to. The idea is that this search form will expand. So currently you can only search by title. But what I imagine we'll have on here are things like drop downs. So you can say, actually, please just show me the titles that I get through my agreement with Consortia X. Or you might say, please show me things which are only on Taylor and Francis Online. You might filter by platform. So we'll be doing work to extend this. But the important thing is this screen is the definitive list of resources that I currently have access to. The export link is basically saying, for the current selection, so these 162 items, I'd like to be able to do, in this case, an export, which is a JSON file, an XML file, or an export for the OCLC resolver, Serial Solutions resolver, or SFX. So this is how we bridge from our packages and our subscriptions and our agreements to our link resolvers. So that's titles, and I think this is probably the screen which is going to drive a lot of work. We've not made much on here hyperlink yet, but it is all eventually going to be hyperlinked. The title will go through to a title page for the institution. Obviously, there's a title, Advanced Robotics, which is the generic knowledge-based title, but actually taking the user through to a page which is their institutional view. So which agreements do I get this title through? When are those agreements likely to expire? So when is my access to this title going to expire? All that sort of thing. That's relevant to the institution rather than the generic title. So this is going to be a link that goes through to the title, an institutional view of the title. Platform data, obviously we've got our coverage data here. This screen is going to start filling up, I think. The rows in this table are going to have to get quite a lot more busy. We'll have access start and end dates. So there's going to be more coming here. We've got quite tabular data, and then we've got more kind of narrative thing here where we put the coverage note, the coverage depth, and the embargo. Again, got to do some work on how this is actually going to look for users. So this is primarily data from GoKB currently. We're not overriding it in any way. So the agreements section is different. If I go to current agreements, this lists all the agreements that I currently have access to. So that means agreements that I've created, as the University of Knowledge Integration, for example, or agreements that I've got access to through my consortial arrangements. So as it happens, test agreement here is an agreement that I have made. So I click on that, and it's taken me through. It said contents of this are Taylor and Francis Engineering and Computing and Technology Collection. So this is an agreement which explicitly contains a package rather than individual titles. Because this is my package, a package that I own rather than one that I'm getting through a consortium, I can add things to this agreement. So obviously I'm adding Taylor and Francis type. So let's just search for TA. This will hopefully find us Taylor and Francis packages. Again, all coming from GoKB here. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to close that window actually. So this was Engineering, Computing and Technology. I'm going to add Behavioral Science to this package as well. So what I've done here is I've said actually this agreement now contains 2 items, and I skipped something that was important. Part of the attraction of the agreement model is this ability to do 2 different things. We can say, I'm going to add stuff to this package, this agreement, now. I want this change to take effect right now. And that's because we found in KB Plus, there are 2 different modes. There's a mode where I've discovered something wrong with my current data and I need to change it to make it correct. So I've discovered that actually I had access to New Scientist when I didn't realize that I had before. So I've got to go and retrospectively add that right now because I'm updating my picture of what I have access to. But the other mode, which I think is much more of a choral perspective, is actually what I'm doing here is I'm planning for my next year. What I'm doing is I'm working out what revision I'm going to make to this agreement for next year. So this dialogue lets me do 2 different things. It lets me say, actually, I'm changing my package today, and that will add an item to the agreement, which is a change now. Or I can say, I'm adding this as a provisional thing. So access shouldn't be available to this package in this case now. It'll come when I activate my new version of this agreement. So what we're trying to model here is this idea that an agreement can have line items in 2 different states. It can have line items which represent the world as it is today, and it can have line items which represent the changes I'm going to make. So that's what we're trying to understand when we're doing this. So that's what this does. Now, if I go back to current agreements, the layout of this table then, all agreements that I currently have access to, whether I have signed them or not, because obviously there'll be agreements that I never sign. Test agreement is owned by me. Actually, all these are owned by me. And I've got a link through to the local agreement here. So what this is saying is, this is an agreement that I've chosen and I've signed. We've not actually implemented this page yet, so I'm not going to click on the link. But what there is in the system is this signatory object. So there's a thing which links my institution with the agreement, and that's the thing where I can put my license and I can put extra information about my signing of this agreement. And that works the same whether it's an agreement I've drafted or an agreement that my consortia has drafted on my behalf. The actions then, if it's an agreement which I've got access to but which I've not yet chosen, then the select action will let me say, actually, this is an agreement which I'm going to choose. So what I'm going to do is, I've got this thing which is imaginatively titled Consortia B Agreement 1. I'm going to select that. The selection status changes to selected yes, and we've got an agreement object now, so we can put in our license, we can track the state. The action, we can no longer select it, but what we can do is to disable it, and I'll talk about that a little bit here. Selection status selected means it's something that I've chosen. It's an agreement that I'm interested in. It's one that I want to manage locally rather than just being an agreement that's available to me as a consortium member. Again, strong suspicion that we'll start adding a lot of filtering to this page. So you might only want to see your selected agreements, or you might only want to see the agreements that are available to you but you've not yet selected. That'll work by changing the filters on this page. If I go through to, because again I own this agreement, I'm going to go through to Consortia B Agreement 1. Currently it doesn't have any content on it, so that's a good thing actually. I'm going to go back to titles briefly. When we were looking at titles before, I think there was 160 or something titles. And then, of course, I went into test agreement and I added Taylor and Francis's behavioural science collection. So go back to titles now, and miraculously, I've got access to 366 titles in my institution. And what the reason for that is that because I have an active agreement, the titles from both these packages have basically been instantly added to my list of what I can see now. If I'd added these for future use, they wouldn't be available. So what we're trying to model here is the ability to know that things will be switched on and switched off at specific dates. So it's not like once you've recorded something has been in an agreement, you can either see it or you can't. Things will activate or deactivate based on particular criteria. I'm going to go back to my agreements for a second. I'm not sure if this is useful, but currently what you can do is I'm going to disable my test agreement. So this is the equivalent of saying, heck, this agreement is on hold for a legal reason or whatever. If I go back to my titles now, you'll see that I've got 0 titles available. And the reason that I'm bringing this up is that this is, because of the data model, this should scale to tens of thousands of titles. You could actually switch off all your access. So you might not want to give this feature to everyone, but I think it is useful. And of course, you'd be unlikely to be switching off all your agreements, but you might want to switch off some. Reasons for that are, you might choose to set up a new agreement for, at the end of a period. So you might have a 2-year agreement, and on a particular date you switch off your old agreement, you switch on your new agreement. That's the sort of thing that this enable and disable will allow you to do. So let's just quickly re-enable. Make sure that I really have re-enabled. That's good. Yeah, my agreements, current. So Consortia B Agreement 1 actually has no content in it at the moment. It doesn't cause us any problems. we were on Taylor and Francis packages before. Let's have a look what we've got in Elsevier. I've not actually gone through these packages in any detail. Pardon me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that this agreement, which was my Consortia A template agreement 1 or whatever it was, I'm going to add Cyverse, the high-tech edition. So I'm going to add that item. And again, I'm focusing on packages because it gives you the most dramatic thing, and we've not done a lot of work on adding individual titles yet. So I'm adding a package, but I've added a package. I'm going to go back to my titles, and now I've got 1,090 titles because Consortia B Agreement 1 gives me access to a good 700 titles. And again, disable titles, back to 366. My exports then will export what I currently have access to. And again, to labour the point a little bit, the titles, the definitive statement of what I believe I currently have access to, the kind of workhorse pivotal screen for this. That's pretty much where we are at the moment. I think we're very happy with the underlying data model. It seems to model very cleanly a lot of the things we've learned in other projects where we learned a lesson too late and we had to bend the data model in an unexpected way to make it work. This model, the agreements abstraction in particular, seems to work really cleanly. And again, just to reiterate, there's no reason why an agreement couldn't consist of individual titles if you wanted to do it this very traditional way. And it might be that you manage that explicit title list at consortial level. That can work really well. But there's no need to actually go through this pantomime where the consortia tells the institutional users, you need to add this title now. What this model enables us to do is very cleanly say, it's okay, the consortia are managing the title list. We can have a different arrangement. We can say, no, actually, the consortia are suggesting the title list, but the individual institutions manage their own. We can still do that, but what this gives us is the ability to actually have proper consortial managed agreements and package lists. So that's the institutional functionality. The only other thing to show you is obviously we've got our KB action here. So if I click on KB, you can see I've currently got 341 packages that I've harvested from GoKB, and I can page through them. All good fun. Look at the details of them, and again, KB titles. So currently I've got 18,555 possible titles that are coming through from GoKB, so that's quite good fun. Yeah, that's a whirlwind tour of where we're at with the direction of travel. I think it's been tricky so far because we've been working on the core nuts and bolts and making sure that the data model is right. I think we're probably very quickly approaching the point where we're ready to collaborate around this more widely now. And I think probably the best way to do that is to collaborate on the backlog and see how quickly we can burn issues off the backlog, develop test cases. I'm really keen that we develop a better functional test suite for this piece of software. So live test cases would be a massive boon. UX input, both in terms of user suggestions and actual effort, making this thing look pretty because it looks very ugly at the moment, not too proud to admit. I wanted this menu to, it does collapse. Not happy that this this is working as well as it could at the moment. So, you know, any input in that area would be welcome. If you think that this has got promise, then it'd be really interesting to hear. If you think, nah, then that'd be interesting as well. I think our future work is probably going to be driven by trying to recreate some of the choral functions. I'm confident that we have a data model that will very easily support some of those functions now, as well as some of these higher level consortial functions. So that's probably, without other input and other steer, that's probably the direction we're going to take. But yeah, I hope that that's given you an idea of our direction of travel and how far we've come since we started playing around with these ideas at the start of the year. As I said, we've not dedicated massive amounts of effort to this. It's been a Slack project that we've done when we've had half days here and there. So yeah, if there's interest, we could certainly ramp up the effort, but it depends on how people want to collaborate. So yeah, interested in your feedback. Thanks ever so much, and goodbye.